Welcome in, everybody. We've got breaking news streaming from these live monitors and taking us all over the country. 2 stops on a Friday: the trial for the senator accused of corruption and the trial for a movie star accused in the death of his co-worker. I'm Reed Cowan. This is CBS News 24/7. Let's go. We want to start with live video out of the state of Utah. Now, this is interesting. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy on a tour of the United States, it seems. Fresh from the NATO summit, Zelenskyy about to speak to our nation's governors. This is at the National Governors Summit taking place in the Beehive State in Salt Lake City. As he did at NATO, Zelenskyy is making the case for American cash to help fund his war against Russia in Ukraine. We'll be watching that. We'll come back to that a little bit in the broadcast. But I want to jump the map just for a second across that state line between Utah and New Mexico and the big involuntary manslaughter trial against actor Alec Baldwin. So here's your headline. Moments ago, that judge excused the jury for the day while the judge considers a defense motion to dismiss the case altogether. Why? Something over disputed ammunition. We'll likely learn more about that on Monday. We were today expecting a big headline by way of the testimony of armorer Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, supposed to take the stand today, but that didn't happen. You'll remember she's the armorer serving 18 months in prison for her role in that on-set shooting that killed cinematographer Helena Hutchins. Now, this is a case that has already changed the standards of Hollywood film sets and doing business-making movies, so we are watching this one closely. By the way, our video monitors are also bringing us the bribery trial of that embattled U.S. senator. We're talking about Bob Menendez of New Jersey. Prosecutors say they are trying to hold the powerful accountable. But here's your headline out of that case. The jury will soon decide the fate of a man accused of accepting gold bars and hundreds of thousands of dollars in exchange for political favors, allegedly to help the Egyptian and Qatari governments. Joining us live now outside that courtroom in Manhattan is CBS New York's Alice Gaynor once again on a Friday. Okay, so this one is fascinating. How soon can that jury start their deliberations, and what will happen inside that room?
Well, the judge just finished instructing the jury, so right now they are on a lunch break, and at 2 p.m. Eastern time, they're going to begin their deliberations, Reed. We've got a verdict sheet here. It's about 4 pages long, 18 counts total for the 3 co-defendants. The senator facing 16 of those counts. Some of the charges include conspiracy to commit bribery, as well as a public official acting as a foreign agent. Again, those are allegations. This morning, the senator entered the courthouse. He was asked what he would expect in a very low voice. He said he expected a not guilty verdict. We know his daughter is here in court today, as well as his sister. They have been here the past couple of days. The judge began his jury instructions yesterday toward the end of the day. Again, he finished up this morning. It took several hours to instruct the jury on how they are to go about their deliberations. Again, they are in lunch right now, and in about an hour's time, they will begin those deliberations. Reed?
All right, we understand his attorneys are pretty fiery, calling the case rotten to the core. Alice, thank you for that update. Hey, right now, we have cameras fired up in the heat of the Texas sun today, where hundreds of thousands of people remain without air conditioning and electricity in the aftermath of Hurricane Beryl. Now, we've been telling you every day that the power companies have been promising with high hopes to get the lights back on soon and the cool air flowing. But now bad news going into the weekend. If you're watching us from that part of the country in the palm of your hand, here's your news. You're going to spend the weekend and into next week without electricity and air conditioning. So as you can imagine, so many people with tempers flaring.
All of our food ruined the day before yesterday, so we haven't eaten since the day before yesterday.
Haven't eaten since the day before yesterday. This is serious. In fact, the concern is deaths due to the heat in Texas. Beryl claimed lives and caused damage in the form of floods and tornadoes also up into Vermont and western New York. In fact, we want to show you this video fresh off the feeds from San Bernardino, California. Kind of a contrast from water to fire. The view of the Vista fire right there on your screen at this very moment. We can tell you that 2,800 of acres of burn, only 13% containment, 470 firefighters doing battle with this one. Here's the worst part, Zoe. We're seeing that forecasters are saying that weekend thunderstorm could bring lightning bolts that could spark more fires?
Yeah, lightning strikes is definitely the most common cause of natural-related wildfires. So that's something that we keep our eyes on over the weekend. We are going to be seeing more chances for those natural-caused lightnings or natural-caused wildfires forming. But the biggest issue is going to be the heat, the dry air, and the very, very gusty winds as well. As high pressure continues to dominate the West Coast, the areas that you could see across western United States with barely any cloud coverage, that's the heat dome. And it's not just places across the coastal communities. It's not just the valley areas. It's even in our higher elevations as you head closer towards the West Coast. Even places like Denver are seeing very, very hot temperatures. So we're going to send things over to Callie Zenandri, who's in Denver right now, who's going to give us the latest. Callie.
Hey, good morning, Zoe. Well, today we are expecting record-breaking temperatures here in Denver. Our normal high for this time of year is 90 degrees. We'll be well above that today in the triple digits. And what's unique about this is we're going to see back-to-back-to-back triple-digit heat here in the Front Range, with 101 degrees forecasted today, with record-breaking temperatures likely not only today, but Saturday and Sunday as well, climbing to possibly 102 degrees. This hot weather has prompted the National Weather Service to prompt a heat advisory. That's in effect through 8 p.m. tonight for the entire Denver metro area, all of the eastern plains down to the south through Colorado Springs as well as Pueblo. And on the western slope, we could see temperatures climb to 110 degrees, some of the hottest weather that we have seen here statewide. This is extended through Sunday with these record-breaking temperatures, and people are trying to stay cool in unique ways here. Some are going up to the high country where we're still seeing warm weather, but a little bit more comfortable. We still have some snow on some of the higher peaks and passes, so some people are going sledding. Other people are hitting the water, taking to the rivers, going tubing, and going to the reservoirs. And also, the Denver metro area has opened cooling centers and libraries as well as rec centers, so people that don't have AC can go there to get a break from the heat. And everyone, of course, trying to remember our furry friends. Denver Animal Protection letting people know, make sure those animals are kept indoors, lots of water and shade, and limit those walks during the heat of the day. But this is unprecedented heat that we're seeing. We're used to seeing hot weather, but not back-to-back-to-back triple-digit heat like what we're expecting today and through the weekend.
That is extremely interesting, but make sure that everybody is safe. Drink a lot of water, and it looks like you have a lot of ways to stay cool, at least in Denver, although many places across the West Coast don't. So we'll have even more details about the record-breaking heat that is on the way for the West Coast of the United States. That'll be coming up in just a bit. Reed.
What a summer, Zoe. Okay, thank you. Well, we are streaming while Vermont is flooding. When we come back, we'll show you some of that record flooding and word that there are some deaths to report because of this. You're watching CBS News 24/7. We're back after the break. We are watching what comes in from Washington on what looks to be a rainy Friday there in Washington. A live look at the White House one day after Joe Biden gave that news conference that by today has Donald Trump cashing in on a couple of Joe Biden gaffes. So we're going to talk about those in just a moment. But right now, the president readying for a flight to Michigan. That's going to be in about an hour. The president's going to jump the map by plane. He'll be at a campaign rally in that very important battleground state of Michigan. That's where automakers in recent days just got that financial shot in the arm from the Biden administration. So let's talk about last night because it is influencing some of the headlines today. You saw it. Joe Biden saying he will not end his re-election run, even as more House Democrats joined in a chorus for Biden to call it a day. And look at this. We've also watched some of the biggest names in the Democratic caucus for some sign of a conversation between Joe Biden and key Democrats. Today, CBS News got this letter from House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries. It characterizes his closed-door meeting with President Joe Biden. Here's a part of it. Jeffries says, quote, "I directly expressed the full breadth of insight, heartfelt perspectives, and conclusions about the path forward that the caucus has shared in our recent time together." So joining us live to break all of this down from Washington, D.C. is CBS News congressional correspondent Scott McFarland. Scott, to me, that sounded like a lot of tap dancing and no real direct cues about what was said in that meeting.
Well, the meeting is likely including a divergence of views. There is no monolithic viewpoint of congressional Democrats at this point, which is one of the reasons why the party is struggling so much to articulate what they collectively think the president should do, because they don't collectively think anything in this regard. You have this group, this growing group of defectors, House Democrats who say the president should withdraw, saying so declaratively. One of them, Jim Himes of Connecticut, top Democrat on the Intelligence Committee, said the president should withdraw, and he did so just a minute or two after the president wrapped up his press conference. more names were added to the list in the hours after. A congressman from Illinois, a congresswoman from Colorado. And there's an expectation the list can grow longer still. But there's still a core group of supporters who've been unequivocal and urging their Democratic colleagues to get back in line behind the president's campaign. And they have not been muted. So as long as there's a divergence of opinion, there's going to be a set of cryptic and mushy statements from congressional leaders.
You know who's not cryptic or mushy? President Joe Biden. He is continuing forward. Scott McFarland, thank you so much for that peek into the business of Washington on a Friday. Meanwhile, Donald Trump seems to be capitalizing on these Biden gaffes. Right now, he's getting ready for a rally this weekend. Fresh on his mind, a meeting between Donald Trump and a controversial world leader. Now, think about this. While NATO leaders met in Washington, Donald Trump met with Viktor Orban. Who's he? He's a far-right Hungarian prime minister, fresh from a visit to Moscow with none other than the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin. So we asked Team Trump what this was all about, as NATO allies are pretty critical of Orban's visits to Beijing and Moscow in recent weeks. Trump's people responded back that the meeting was, quote, to look at possibilities of peace in the conflict in Ukraine. Hey, our video feeds are getting you back to the corruption trial against New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez. You know, after 8 weeks of testimony and some pretty fiery in and out of court exchanges, the fate of that embattled senator will soon be in the hands of a jury. We just learned that jury just got final instructions from the judge. But we want to go back to some of the fire in that trial. Menendez's defense team told jurors in their closing arguments, this case is, quote, rotten to the core. Well, Menendez pled not guilty to charges of corruption, and a lot of people saying that he used his power to gain influence by taking bribes. A 5-year scheme, in fact, the accusation of accepting gold bars and cash in exchange for political favors. Let's take you to New Mexico now in that big involuntary manslaughter trial against Alec Baldwin. The judge excused the jury for the day while the judge considers a defense motion to dismiss the case over disputed ammunition. We don't know a lot about what they mean by that, but we'll be watching closely. Okay, you see the big logo there? You recognize it because millions of you pay bills to that company. If you have AT&T, listen up. Word of a massive security breach. AT&T revealing hackers accessed records of calls and texts for nearly all of its millions of customers worldwide. The company says this does not include the content of your calls or the content of your texts or any other personal identifiable information like social security numbers or birthdays. They add the data is not currently publicly available, but we have learned at least one person has been caught. Okay, when we see it, you see it. That's the promise of CBS News 24/7, streaming right there into the palm of your hand. Going live to Utah now in that governor's conference where the president of Ukraine, Zelenskyy, is about to address these governors and make his case for more money, more U.S. money to help fight against Russia.
Listen in. Thank you so much. Governor Cox, esteemed governors, and all present here. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you who really cares about protecting life. These days, I have been in Washington. I visited the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation, and I was in the United States Congress speaking with representatives of both parties in both chambers, and I was at the White House and the NATO summit meeting with the President Biden. At each of these meetings, I thanked America, all our friends in America and all Americans who support Ukraine, our people, our freedom, our independence in this terrible war started by Russia. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you. Unfortunately, there are different wars in the world, but this is a war where it's absolutely clear what is good and what boundaries evil crosses. This is one of the most transparent battles between good and evil of our time. It's clear that Ukraine has done nothing wrong before God and people, and all the pain our country suffers is only the result of Russia's criminal actions and sick desires, only its unprovoked and unjust aggression. So it's so valuable that so many people and countries have united to help us to save our freedom, and thus the common human understanding that evil must always lose. What else would our world rely on if evil did not lose and if good people did not unite in battles against what threatens any life and any values? Of course, everyone does what they must, and I have said many times that we do not ask the United States and other partners to fight for us. We do not ask for your boots on the ground. The only thing we ask for is sufficient support, air defense systems for our cities, weapons for our men and women on the front line, support in protecting normal life and rebuilding. This is all we need to withstand and drive Russia from our land, and to send strong signal to all other potential aggressors which are watching. And we truly receive such support, and I'm grateful for this. Thank you again. Thank you. And yes, we receive it from American friends, from dozens of countries. Of course, Americans' leadership is indeed felt, and we receive it from many just ordinary people, communities, companies from different parts of the world, and everyone who does not remain indifferent truly protects life. As it has been said, the one who plants and the one who waters have one purpose, and each will be rewarded according to their labor. Today, I especially want to personally thank you for your support. The state of Utah, other states, many American hearts, and many American communities, all those who do not want and will not allow evil to prevail. Dear friends, many of you have probably heard or seen in the media about the recent Russian missile strike on a children's hospital some days ago, and this direct hit on one of the hospital buildings, and this could not have been just a coincidence. Children who, with the help of doctors, are trying to overcome terrible diseases such as cancer and heart diseases, found themselves on the street amidst ruins and somewhere trapped under the debris. The hospital, the name of this hospital, by the way, Okhmadit, one of the best children's hospital, not only in Ukraine, but in all of Europe, was significantly damaged. And we are now working to quickly restore its operations and ensure that children can be treated in other hospitals. Cancer does not wait for the Russians to stop bombing our cities. And children need treatment, need it now. Children also need to go to school, and their parents need to feel at least basic safety to be able to live, be able to work, and provide for their families. Just think about the numbers. Russia destroyed nearly 160,000 of civilian objects, just 130,000 homes, 3,000 schools, 700 medical, and 170 churches. Who are they? All of this presents us with a huge range of tasks, and many of them will be resolved within communities very close to the ground. And that is why we so deeply appreciate when our friends from around the world come to Ukraine to see everything for themselves. Of course, speak the truth about what they have witnessed, help rebuild all that is very necessary for a normal life, and personally tell everyone who has not seen such a war that good must always triumph in war. To make this happen, to ensure the true victory of good, your voice, each governor, each community leader, all pure hearts is crucial. And I invite all of you to visit Ukraine and to see our people, our struggle. And I'm proud of our people and what Ukrainians are achieving now. Believe me, together we can achieve much more for all of us, for our countries, for our communities, for our people. I invite you to build people-to-people connections that will last forever. And we already see Yuda's contribution to rebuilding our country, and you have helped thousands of people, and such help can be help for millions of people and for the cause of good in general, which rewards everyone, regardless of where they live, because we all share the same values, and we do not want war to disrupt life anywhere. Thank you for your support, and I wish you fruitful work, productive discussions, of course, at these meetings, and I hope that together, Ukrainians and Americans, we will prevail. God bless America and Americans. Slava Ukraini. Thank you so much.
All right, so our live video feed showing you that out of Salt Lake City, Utah, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy now seeing a standing ovation from the National Governors Conference, and Zelenskyy really making the point as he shakes his host's hand there that war is expensive, that he does not expect Americans or America's allies to be boots on the ground to fight Russia, but they do need the financial support, the backing to get that technology to beat back Russia and what he calls Russia's sick war in Ukraine. Keep in mind, and let's really frame this in time, while Zelenskyy has been speaking to NATO leaders, arguably looking for money and looking for clout with entry into NATO, he's also talking to our nation's governors for the same reason. And that is happening relatively at the same time when Russia's president has been on the stump also for resources. We know President Putin of Russia just recently was in North Korea striking a deal to get arms to fight against Ukraine. So you're now seeing both sides of this war reaching out to international partners, but for very different reasons. We're going to be talking about this more in this broadcast, but for now, you're watching CBS News 24/7 streaming. We're back in just a moment. I want to take you to Washington now with a live look at the White House. Inside, President Joe Biden getting ready to fly to battleground state Michigan very soon. Joe Biden needs Michigan voters behind him to beat Donald Trump. By the way, this visit comes on the heels of two pretty big news-making items. Number one, Biden's shot in the arm, giving the auto industry some money to try to help them out and get electric vehicles on the road. But also, two, last night's news conference that offered up a couple of defiant Biden gaffes. Those are also getting headlines. So let's fast forward to today. More House Democrats joining calls for Joe Biden to call it a day and just step aside. In fact, look at this. Today, we just got our hands on a letter from House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, who says he met with President Joe Biden. Here's a part of what he said. Jeffries says, quote, "I directly expressed the full breadth of insight, heartfelt perspectives, and conclusions about the path forward that the caucus has shared in our recent time together." And so we're watching this in real time to see exactly what this could mean. We expect in this broadcast to be able to get some expert analysis on this. But for the interim, we're going to move to Texas. To Texas now in the aftermath of Hurricane Beryl, where 500,000 residents and businesses already dealing with sweltering temperatures are now finding out that they won't have power back until next week. This is a headline nobody wanted because temperatures are up and pretty high. And in fact, with the threat of people getting sick or even dying in the heat, there are some frustrations. Listen. All right, let's bring Zoe in to talk about that.
Yeah, the heat continues as that huge dome of high pressure is not going anywhere. Or it is a little bit, but I guess it is still going to be impacting quite a lot of us. In fact, 150 million Americans today are going to be at or above 90 degrees as that, again, huge dome of high pressure. You can see the areas that don't have clouds across the West Coast, and it's kind of swirling over the four corners. That is where the high pressure is currently located. It will begin to shift, though, over the next 24 hours, and it will begin to bring that heat a little bit further towards the central United States. So let's take a look at that and see how hot it's going to be this afternoon, because once again, we are expecting dozens of weather stations to tie or break record high temperatures for this afternoon. Again, many places at or above 100 degrees. That is something that we do have to keep in mind. Las Vegas at 115 today. That will be their 7th day in a row at or above 115 degrees. This is their longest streak on record at or above 115 degrees. That just lets you know this is a historic heat wave that is going to continue to build with widespread excessive heat warnings, excessive heat watches that are going to remain in effect. And we could take a look at that just by looking at our graphics behind me. Widespread across the West Coast, we are seeing these heat risks, but you notice that it's extending a little bit further across the northern Great Plains, and that's where our high pressure is going to begin to head over the next 24 to 48 hours. So today, again, we are going to be noticing the biggest impacts when it comes to heat-related illness going to be across the far west coast of the United States and down into the desert southwest. But by tomorrow, this huge ridge of high pressure that we've been dealing with for the past week or so will finally begin to nudge its way off to the central United States. And by doing so, it will finally allow this excessive heat across the desert southwest to kind of spread out across the northern United States. So this ridge of high pressure continuing to move further and further over to the east. By Sunday, it's the central United States and over to the Midwest that is going to be dealing with more excessive heat that is on the way. These are all things to keep in mind as we step out over the next 24, 48, 72 hours. The heat is going to move a little bit, so at least the West Coast should get a break over the next day or so. Reed.
All right, thank you so much. Let's get back to those live images from Washington, D.C. right now in a conversation that we promised you just a moment ago. Look, it's TV deconstructed, and sometimes we have some problems talking to people. But right now, joining us from Detroit is CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe. Ed, I want to get back to that letter from Hakeem Jeffries, because I listened to it, I read it, and I felt like there really wasn't a cue as to what came definitively from that closed-door meeting with Joe Biden.
That's because things are still in a holding pattern. The president today continuing his outreach to congressional Democrats, trying to convince them to stick with him. He had a virtual meeting today with members of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. We're anticipating another one with Asian lawmakers. We're getting word of others scheduled for tomorrow as well. This as the number of House Democrats who are calling for him to get out has climbed to 18. So we're still in double digits. It's not everyone, but it is a growing number. And we know the president heading here to Michigan for a dinner time rally that is designed to begin refocusing his party onto the other side as they get ready to meet in Milwaukee next week for the Republican convention. The president expected tonight to focus on this so-called Project 2025, or a plan for how the new Trump administration could govern. It's been put together by the Heritage Foundation, a conservative think tank in Washington, and hundreds of people who worked across the Trump administration have contributed to it in the last several months. Former president, the candidate, has said he has nothing to do with it. He's disavowed it. But he's on camera a few years ago suggesting that they should keep their work up. And, of course, there are veterans of his campaign and administration involved in the project. The White House, the Biden campaign, expected to continue to raise concerns about that, especially in the next week when the president is set to make 3 different stops in Austin, Texas, and Las Vegas, with a focus on civil rights, voting rights, immigrant rights, and issues of a special concern to Black and Latino voters.
All right, and CBS News, just want to let our viewers know, has a great article on CBS.com. What is Project 2025? To your point, it's a good read. It's something good to study because it is going to be a counterpoint that the Biden administration is going to hang their hat on, as it were. Ed O'Keefe, hey, glad we finally got you in Detroit. Say hi to all of our friends who work in the auto industry. Thank you so much for talking to us today. Let's jump to space news now. From autos to space. SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket took quite a hit last night during launch. The company was planning on sending out another batch of 20 Starlink internet satellites out of California. SpaceX says an oxygen leak developed in the second stage, meaning it was largely unable to complete its second burn. That left the satellites on board in the wrong orbit, hitting them with some tremendous drag. That's what the scientists call it. They are expected to re-enter Earth's atmosphere and then be destroyed in the process. Now, we are told they are not expected to pose any threat to other satellites in orbit or to public safety. Hey, check this out. Billions of galaxies intertwining together to make a figure that so many people are talking about today. Looks like a penguin and an egg. No, this is not from Pixar. This is real, floating over our heads in space. This just came together just in time to celebrate the second anniversary of NASA's James Webb Space Telescope. Within 2 years, we understand, this device was able to bring some pretty spectacular images like this one, doing some happy feet, so to speak. Infrared light, this telescope can actually give us clearer definition of how a blue haze mixes together with gas and other stars to bring us images like this. Nice to leave the planet for a minute, right? Get out of politics. But we're going to take you right back in because politics are definitely making the headlines. Coming up, we're going to talk to CBS's Katrina Kaufman about that Zelenskyy speech in Utah to our nation's governors. You're watching CBS News 24/7. We love having you with us. We thank you. We'll be back after the break. Welcome back, everybody. Earlier, we showed you live Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy giving a speech at the National Governors Association meeting today in Salt Lake City, Utah. Katrina Kaufman joins us live now from Utah to talk about that. Pretty fascinating to see that. Here's what's also fascinating to me. We knew that Zelenskyy was going to be meeting with NATO leaders, but then quickly pivoted when he found out he could talk to the governors. What's in it for Zelenskyy to talk to state governors?
I mean, this is a crucial demographic for him. He's trying to garner more support in America. He just got affirmation of support from NATO, and apparently this is something that they've been putting together for weeks behind the scenes. When Governor Cox introduced him, he said that the Ukrainians originally said that this would never happen, but it did. And there was a lot of enthusiasm for Zelenskyy in that room. There were multiple standing ovations when he spoke, when he came on stage, and he's really trying to get the support of Americans, of these governors. He spoke really passionately about the recent strike on the Children's Hospital in Ukraine and the devastation that that has created for the children and the parents there. You know, he said that cancer doesn't wait for a war to finish, and he really just emphasized that they're not looking for Americans to fight this war for them, but they do need our support.
Also thought it was fascinating some of the themes he hit. I am from the state of Utah, so I know that he spoke just in the shadows of Huntsman Cancer Institute, Primary Children's Medical Center, and talked about that struggle several times of good versus evil. Definitely things in Utah that resonate in a very big way. Thank you so much for being there. It was good to hear your thoughts. Trina, we appreciate you. Let's get now to the corruption trial of embattled New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez. We can tell you right now, his fate is in the hands of the jury. The judge just gave instructions to jurors after 8 weeks of trial proceedings. His defense team telling jurors the case against him is, quote, rotten to the core as they wrap their closing arguments. Menendez has pleaded not guilty to what prosecutors are claiming was a 5-year scheme of accepting gold bars and cash in exchange for political favors. Jumping the map now on our video feeds to Texas, and you are seeing a manhunt for the suspect who allegedly killed a Harrison County deputy in an ambush attack. Your headline at this hour, manhunt over. The attack happened Thursday morning in the northeastern part of that county. The man in question, Ronnie Palmer Jr. So police went on social media, posted his mugshot, and they were able to quickly take him into custody after finding him at a house. He is being charged with capital murder in connection with the shooting death of Deputy Fernando Escueda. International news. Today, Israeli tanks continue to roam through Gaza. Israel pressing ahead with their offensive across the north, south, and center of the Gaza Strip. The military action may be geared toward increasing pressure on Hamas during negotiations for a potential ceasefire. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has just sent a delegation to Cairo for further talks about a proposed deal. Now, right now we know the framework under discussion this time, and there have been many times and many talks. This time it would include the release of at least some of the hostages held by Hamas. Israel and Hamas going back and forth, negotiating through mediators who are there once again from Egypt and Qatar. Hey, listen up here in the United States. If you have AT&T, we have word of a massive security breach. The company revealing hackers accessed records and calls and texts for nearly all of its millions of customers on cell phones. The company says this does not include content of the calls or texts or any other personally identifiable information like social security numbers or birthdays. They add the data also is not currently publicly available, _currently. We've learned at least one person has been caught, and AT&T is investigating with government officials. There's new research on ways to lower your risk of getting cancer. In a groundbreaking new cancer study, researchers at the American Cancer Society estimate that 44% of all cancer deaths among adults 30 and older in the United States could be linked to lifestyle risks that we can all easily change. The most impactful, of course, we hear this all the time, stop smoking. Others include having excess body weight, alcohol consumption, physical inactivity, and diet.
In some ways, it's a lot of common sense, but in other ways, it's recognizing that these important lifestyle factors, which have historically been associated with improving heart disease risk and diabetes risk, now we're actually attributing to reducing cancer risk as well.
So health experts say one easy way to prevent cervical cancer and cancers of the tongue and throat, getting vaccinated against HPV. But data shows only 38% of children are vaccinated against that virus. According to the American Cancer Society, 1 in 2 men and 1 in 3 women will be diagnosed with cancer in their lifetime. Now this. Consider that the heartbeat of our news organization. We are in your communities telling your stories. Our Eye on America series focuses on some of the issues that you live with every day in your neighborhoods. And today, we're going to have you take a ride with me to Illinois. The state is the top grower of soybeans in the entire country, most of which is used to feed the chicken and the beef that so many people eat. But climate change affecting farmers. And as CBS News Chicago meteorologist David Yeomans reports, it may end up affecting what shoppers pay at the store.
About an hour west of Chicago, the pace is a little slower in DeKalb County.
My parents and myself and my wife farm about 2,400 acres of row crops.
That's an area 10 times the size of Millennium Park.
We have some of the best soils in the world.
And no one watches the weather more closely than a farmer.
Honestly, I think I have 5 different weather apps on my phone, and I probably check them over a dozen times a day.
This land has been in the Frieders family for 60 years, and Ryan's father Ronald lives just a few miles down the road.
I graduated in 1970 and basically walked out of high school and started farming with my folks. Weather's always been a challenge, but it seems that it's getting more extreme. Everything's changing. It seems like the temperatures are getting hotter than normal. The water levels are lower than normal.
We're faced with longer periods of a lack of rain, what might be called a flash drought. We're faced with larger amounts of rain at one point in time. Whereas we might have gotten an inch of rain, which would be really great. Now we might get 3 or 4 inches of rain in a couple hours. When the spring rains delay us from planting, it affects our entire year of the farm.
These changes are all consistent with last year's National Climate Assessment's expectations for Midwest agriculture in a warming world. Excessive spring rain delaying planting, rapid transitions between flood and drought, and warmer temperatures stressing crops.
And then 2021, that was probably the hardest harvest that I ever lived through. Our crops were flattened.
Worsening thunderstorm wind damage also linked to climate change in a new study.
The changes in the weather are definitely challenges to farm income.
Are these weather changes something that people are talking about in the farming community?
Definitely.
Dr. Michael Langemeyer is a professor of agricultural economics at Purdue University.
I don't know if it's directly impacting what the consumers pay to a large degree yet.
He and his team surveyed 400 farmers nationwide.
We asked farmers about how worried they were in terms of the changing weather patterns. And about 25% were either very worried or fairly worried. And I thought that was a relatively high percent. They don't really talk about what it may be attributed to. They just talk about it as different. And then we've got to think about how we're going to respond to these changes.
A lot of farmers are talking about changes in extremes. Do farmers ever talk about climate change?
The glaciers melting, for instance, at the poles and things like that, like those are hard to understand how they relate to us at the farm. But then you see things happening that aren't the same as they used to be, and you tend to wonder if the things are more related than you ever thought they were.
Meteorologist David Yeomans, CBS News, Chicago.
All right, speaking of climate change, our monitors caught this video out of Vermont that really tells the story of the impacts of Beryl after it ripped through Jamaica and Mexico, then into Texas. The northeast trajectory landed that storm sitting on and flooding Vermont. And we now know flash flooding there killed at least 2 people. Look at this video here. You can see a very waterlogged Vermont. And really just to make that point more, our feed's also getting this video off the monitors, raging waters. It's really making that river called the Winooski River run over its banks. This is the river between Vermont cities and Burlington and Winooski, and you can see it's a mess there and no sign that that will let up anytime soon. Zoe, you're watching the impacts of Beryl in real time.
Yes, well, we actually do have a little bit of good news for Vermont. There are 2 rivers left that are still in that major flood risk category, and they've already crested. We're luckily going to be going down from here, but that doesn't mean the threat for flooding is over, as we're looking at a stationary front that is set up all across the east coast of the United States. I'm standing directly on it, but this has the potential to drop an additional 2 to 4 and maybe even 5 inches of rain across the coastal communities of the eastern parts of the United States. So let's take a closer look at that, where the stationary front is currently set up, because this is what we're more concerned about over the next 24 hours. We are going to be seeing, again, that stationary front setting up across the east coast of the United States, and it does have the potential to bring some heavier rainfall across the area. There we go. We can take a closer look at that, again, sitting directly over North Carolina right now. North Carolina right now, eastern parts of it at least, are seeing the most direct impacts from that system. So that is something that we do have to keep our eye on. Excessive rainfall, excessive flooding from those systems extending from North Carolina all the way up into New Jersey and the Delmarva Peninsula as well. So let's take a look at what we're expecting over the next 12 hours or so. Again, heavy storms are going to set up starting in North Carolina, continuing up across the Delmarva Peninsula. That includes places like Philadelphia and Washington, D.C. That will extend all the way through early tomorrow morning. Again, Philly and Washington, D.C. have the potential for this excessive rainfall to last all the way through the overnight hours and into early tomorrow. The reason that we do have moderate risk for excessive rainfall all across the East Coast today, slight risk up north, and even Boston is under that slight risk. That's something to keep your eye on, with widespread flash flooding alerts that are going to set up across the areas that you see that stationary front in as well. That is something to keep your eye on over the next couple of days, but at least we aren't going to be dealing with necessarily this flooding threat bringing us heat. It's actually cooled us down a little bit. The heat, though, will return by over the next 6 to 10 days, and we're going to keep our eyes on that over into next week. Reed.
All right, Zoe, we want to show our viewers on the stream right now this video. It looks like Texas, but it's not. Tornadoes tore through western New York State. Look at that. Rooftops ripped off. There are now trenches where trees once stood. We understand people have been injured in this. A lot of people in that part of the country say they need these trees in order to make a living and feed their families.
We're taking care of all the trees that are down, which is heartbreaking in itself because we had a lot of fruit trees and nut trees, and our maple trees we actually harvest sap out of, so we syrup it, and like all that's gone. So I mean, you know, trying to figure out what we're going to do in the future to provide for our family, it's not easy.
At its peak, the storms left more than 25,000 people without electricity to try to deal with cleaning up and picking up. We want to take you to a fuming volcanic crater in Italy, and look at that blow. Our monitors bring us this video out of Mount Stromboli. That eruption caused Italy, the entire country, to do what they call the top red alert. So you see that black plumes of smoke and ash, they really tower high above the skies. If you travel to that area, or if you're watching from Italy on the stream, you know this is Ginostra, Italy. It's a small Italian island that sits just a few miles north of Sicily. By the way, that's where Mount Etna at this hour belches smoke and explosive lava flows in recent days too. So as you might deduce, that country has several active volcanoes that frequently cause the ground to shake, some seismic activity, so we're watching that as well. We also just got brand new video off the feeds for you from Pamplona, Spain. This is the famous running of the bulls. And there's news today. 3 more people have been injured, 1 gored. The Red Cross says the man gored is in stable condition. This is a week-long festival that sees revelers fleeing from these specially bred bulls through the narrow streets of that city's old quarter. It is quintessential Pamplona, but always dangerous. Seems like we bring you injuries every year when this happens. You know, just 2 weeks ago, before the Paris Summer Olympic Games, and we are getting our first look at the venue to host volleyball and tennis and handball competitions. The temporary structures, you can see, are into place now, and they were designed especially to be built and dismantled in record time. So put them up, take them down. In between, history's made with sport. Officials say the arena is set to welcome 80,000 visitors a day. Those games are set to begin July 26th. All right, that is it for us on CBS News 24/7. Right now, we want to take you to a live picture in Milwaukee. Why are we showing you Milwaukee? Because there's a countdown in our country to the Republican National Convention, where Donald Trump is the respective nominee for the Republican candidacy for the presidency. And what we really want to know in the days to come, when will Donald Trump let us know his choice for a running mate? We'll be watching it, as always, on CBS News 24/7.